Abigail Turner dropped the bundle of firewood and ran. She ran on a leg that screamed with every step, chasing the wagon that carried her father, her stepmother, her two stepbrothers, and every scrap of food, water, and mercy she had left in this world. "Wait!" she screamed, her voice cracking against the empty mountains. "Don't leave me! Please don't leave me here!" The wagon never slowed. It never even turned. They left her under the blazing summer sun because they'd decided a crippled, heavy girl wasn't worth the room she took up. Before we go on, if stories of betrayal, courage, and hard-won second chances move your heart, take a moment to subscribe and follow Abigail's journey all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The wagon was already 100 yards gone when Abigail's bad leg buckled and dropped her into the dirt. She caught herself on her palms. The gravel bit into them. She didn't feel it. She was watching the canvas top of that wagon shrink against the foothills, watching the dust rise behind the wheels and hang there in the dead summer air like a curtain drawing shut. "Pa?" she called again. Her throat was already raw. "Pa, I'm right here. I just fell behind, that's all, Pa." Nothing answered her but a hawk somewhere overhead and the grinding of her own breath. She got her good leg under her and pushed up and went after them again, half running, half lurching, one hand pressed to her hip where the old brake had never set right. She made it maybe 40 yards before her body quit on her, and she went down a second time, harder on her knees this time, and stayed there. "They'll stop," she said out loud because the sound of a voice, even her own, was better than the silence. "They'll stop at the creek up ahead and water the team, and they'll see I'm not there, and they'll come back. Della will be angry. Della's always angry. But Pa will come back." She believed it for almost an hour. She kept walking in the direction the wheels had gone, following the ruts they'd pressed into the dry ground, talking to herself the whole way to keep her feet moving. She talked about the creek they were supposed to be heading toward. She talked about how cold the water would be. She talked about how when she caught up, she wouldn't even be angry, she'd just be glad. She'd just say, "Pa, I thought you'd lost me." And he'd laugh his low laugh and tell her she worried too much. The wagon ruts crossed a flat stretch of hardpan, and the ruts disappeared the way wheel marks do on ground, baked too hard to take an impression. Abigail stood there at the edge of the flat, with the sun coming down on the crown of her head, like a hand pressing her into the earth, and she turned in a slow circle, and there was no wagon, and no dust, and no creek, and no family in any direction she looked. That was the moment she understood. Not lost, not behind. Left. "No," she said. She said it the way you say it to a thing you can already feel is true. Quiet. Almost polite, as if a soft enough no might talk the world out of what it had just done to her. Her mind went back over the last 2 days, the way a tongue goes back over a broken tooth, finding all the places it hurt, all the things she'd been too tired or too trusting to read right at the time. She remembered Della at the cook fire the night before, talking low to Pa, going quiet the second Abigail came near with the water bucket. She remembered Della saying the way you'd remark on the weather, "That girl eats as much as a grown man and walks slower than the oxen." She remembered Pa not saying anything back, not one word. She'd thought at the time that he simply hadn't heard. She remembered her stepbrother Lonnie, 14, and cruel the way only a boy raised by a cruel woman can be, watching her struggle to climb into the wagon that morning and saying, "Why don't you just walk, Abby? You could use it." She remembered Caleb, the older one, laughing, and she remembered God help her. She remembered now how this morning before they broke camp, Della had handed her a bundle of firewood to carry and pointed her up the trail ahead, saying the wagon would catch up. "You go on ahead and gather what kindling you find. We'll be right behind you. Right behind you." They had sent her ahead so she'd be walking away from them, so that when they hitched the team and turned the wagon and drove the other direction, she'd already have her back to it. So she wouldn't see them go until they were gone. It had been planned, every piece of it. The firewood was a leash to lead her off, and she had taken it and thanked them and walked off into the wilderness, carrying her own abandonment in her 2 arms like a gift. Abigail's knees went out from under her, and she sat down hard in the dirt of the flat, And she did not cry, not yet, because the thing was too big to cry at. You cry at a thing that fits inside you. This did not fit inside her. This was a thing she had to grow large enough to even hold. "All right," she whispered after a long time. "All right then." She got up. She'd find out in the days to come that getting up was the only thing she knew how to do that they hadn't been able to take from her. The sun was past its high mark and starting its long fall toward the western peaks, and Abigail did the math the way her grandmother had taught her before the fever took the old woman 3 winters back. Heat kills you faster than hunger. Thirst kills you faster than heat. Water first. Find water and you buy yourself days. Days were what she needed. Days were where hope lived. She still had the firewood. She looked down at it scattered around her, where she'd dropped it, and she almost laughed a sound with no humor in it at all. "Reckon I'll keep some of you." She told the wood, and she gathered 3 good straight sticks, the longest one for a walking staff to take the weight off her hip, and left the rest. She had in the pocket of her apron a heel of cornbread wrapped in a rag gone hard as a hoof that she'd slipped there at breakfast out of an old habit of squirreling food away that she'd never been able to break, because in Della's house, a girl who didn't squirrel food away didn't always eat. She had no canteen. The canteens were on the wagon. She had no knife. The knives were on the wagon. She had a heel of cornbread, 3 sticks of firewood, a body that hurt, and the dress on her back. "It's enough," she said. It was not enough. She said it anyway because the saying of it was a kind of defiance, and defiance was the only food she had that wouldn't run out. She set off downhill. Water runs downhill. Grandmother again speaking through 3 years of grave dirt. When you're lost, child, you go down. The land carries water down, and you follow it. The first day after, she found no water. She walked until the light failed, and then she walked a little into the dark until she couldn't trust her feet anymore, and then she sat down with her back against a boulder that still held the day's warmth, and she ate half the heel of cornbread in tiny bites, making it last, and she let herself think about her family for the first time since the flat. She thought about her father. Josiah Turner had not always been a coward. She had memories of him, real ones, she was sure of it from before her mother died, memories of a big-shouldered man with sawdust in his beard who lifted her onto his shoulders so she could touch the top of a doorframe and called her his little foreman, and meant it like the finest thing a man could call his daughter. That man had married Della 2 years after the burying, because a homestead needs a woman, and a grieving man is a foolish one, and that man had watched Della rearrange his whole house and his whole heart until there was no corner of it left that belonged to the daughter from before. He hadn't turned the wagon himself. Abigail knew that the way she knew her own heartbeat. He'd let Della turn it. He'd sat in the seat with his big hands slack in his lap and let his wife drive his daughter into the wilderness to die because saying no to Della was a fight he'd lost so many times he'd stopped showing up for it. "That's worse," Abigail said into the dark. "You hear me, Pa? That's worse than if you'd done it yourself. At least a man who does a thing owns it." The dark didn't answer. The dark never does. But the saying of it loosened something in her chest, and she found finally that she could cry. And so she did for a long time, quietly, her face in her hands. And when she was done, she felt scraped out and clean, the way a wound feels when the poison's finally drawn. She slept some. She woke with the first gray light and her tongue thick as a saddle blanket, and she got up. The second day she found water. She found it by following a thin green seam down a ravine brush that stayed green when everything around it had gone brown. And at the bottom there was a seep where water came up out of the rock slow as molasses and pooled in a basin no bigger than a washbowl. She lowered her face to it and drank, and it tasted of iron and mud, and was the best thing she had ever put in her mouth in 24 years of living. She'd just lifted her head, water running down her chin, when she heard the sound, a dry, brittle buzz close. Her whole body went still in the old animal way, the way a body knows danger before the mind has named it. She turned her head, slow, slow, and there on a flat rock, a yard from her right hand, was a rattlesnake, thick as her wrist, coiled its tail, standing up and shivering, its flat head drawn back. "Easy," Abigail whispered. "Easy now. I'm leaving. This is your water. You can have it. I'm just leaving." She moved her hand. Slow. The snake's head followed it. She had the longest of her 3 firewood sticks lying across her lap, and she did not reach for it because reaching was a fast motion, and fast motions are what get a person bit, and a snake bite 100 miles from any doctor is just a slower way of dying alone in the rocks. She slid backward on her seat an inch, 2 inches, never taking her eyes off the snake, talking to it the whole time in the low, steady voice you'd use on a spooked horse. "There it is. There. I'm going. Look at me going. You've got the whole creek to yourself, you mean old thing, and I hope it does you good." The snake held its coil until she'd backed a full body length away. Then it lowered its tail, eased its head down, and poured itself off the rock and away into the brush, like water finding a crack. Abigail sat in the dirt and shook. She shook for a full 5 minutes, the spent terror running out of her hands. And then, and this surprised her, she laughed. "Well," she said to the empty ravine, "reckon I'm not as slow as Della says. Outran a rattlesnake setting down." It was a small thing. It was a foolish thing to take pride in. But she took it because pride was another food that wouldn't run out, and she was learning to live on what she had. She filled her belly with the iron water as much as she dared, and she soaked the rag her cornbread had been wrapped in and tied it wet around her neck, and she marked the seep in her mind in case she had to come back. And then she went on downhill, always downhill, because down was where the bigger water lived, and big water meant a creek, and a creek meant maybe someday people. The 3rd day, the heat broke her. There's a kind of heat in those high western summers that doesn't feel like heat at all after a while. It feels like a weight. Like the sky has come down to rest its full weight on your shoulders and means to grind you slowly into the ground. By midday, Abigail had stopped sweating, and the part of her grandmother that still lived in her head said very quietly, "That's bad, child." When the sweat stops, the dying started. She kept walking because she didn't know how to do anything else. She talked the whole time now to keep herself company, to keep herself moving, to keep herself a person and not just a body. She talked to her grandmother. She talked to her mother, who she barely remembered. She talked to the daughter she'd always thought she might have someday, the one she could feel slipping further out of reach with every staggering step. "I'd have been good to you," she told the daughter who didn't exist. "I'd never have left you anywhere. Not for slow, not for heavy, not for any reason at all. You hear me? Not ever." By late afternoon, she was weaving. By dusk, she was crawling part of the time her staff lost somewhere back along the trail. Her good knee, bloody, her bad hip. A white fire that she'd stopped being able to tell apart from the heat. She crawled toward a sound she'd been hearing for an hour and hadn't dared believe in a soft, continuous rush, the sound of water moving, real water, a creek. She came over a low rise on her hands and knees, and there it was below her, a creek running clear and quick over stones, and she made a sound that wasn't a word. And she pitched herself down the bank toward it, and got her face into the cold, and drank until her stomach cramped. And then she rolled onto her back in the shallows with the water running over her, and she looked up at the first stars coming out, and she thought with a strange floating calm, "This is a good enough place. I can die here. There's water and there's stars. That's more than they left me with." That was the thought she was thinking when she heard somewhere off in the dark on the far bank the long, low howl of a wolf, and then another answering closer. Abigail tried to sit up and couldn't. Her body had spent everything it had to reach the creek, and there was nothing left in the account. She lay in the cold water and listened to the wolves call each other in toward the smell of blood on her knee, and she did the only thing left to her. She found a stone, a smooth, heavy one the size of 2 fists, and she dragged it to her chest and held it, and she set her jaw. "Come on, then," she said to the dark, and her voice didn't shake. "I'm not as easy as my family figured. You'll get me. But by God, I'll mark one of you first." The wolves came down to the water's edge. She could see their eyes, low green coals in the starlight. 3 of them. 4. She raised the stone. And then a sound split the night that she had never heard in her life, and would never forget for the rest of it, a single rifle shot. Enormous, flat, slapping back off the canyon walls in a dozen echoes, and the dirt kicked up between her and the nearest wolf, and the whole pack scattered like blown leaves, and was gone. Abigail lay there with the stone still raised over her head. She heard boots on the gravel, coming down the bank, unhurried, a man's heavy, deliberate tread. A shape came between her and the stars. A tall shape, broad through the shoulders, a rifle held loose and ready in one hand, a wide hat throwing his face into shadow. He stood over her and looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and for a long moment neither one of them said anything at all. She still had the stone raised. "You can put that down, ma'am," the man said. His voice was low and rough, the voice of a man who didn't use it much. "Or you can keep it up if it makes you feel better. But I'd as soon you didn't brain me. I've had a long enough day." Abigail did not put the stone down. "Who are you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. She didn't have the strength left to lift it into a question. "Name's Silas Boone. I've got a place up the mountain. I heard the wolves working themselves up and came down to see what they'd found." He crouched slow, keeping his hands where she could see them, the way a man does with a wounded animal. What they'd found was a half-drowned woman about to fight off a whole pack with a creek rock, which, he added, and she thought she heard something that might have been respect in it, is about the foolishest and bravest thing I've seen in a good long while. "My family." Abigail started and stopped. Her teeth had started to chatter, the cold of the creek finally reaching her through the heat sickness. "My family left me 3 days back. I've been walking." Silas Boone went very still at that. "Left you," he repeated. "Drove off and left me." She laughed, and it came out wrong, broken into pieces. "Said they'd be right behind me. They were never behind me. They were—" Her voice gave out. She pulled the stone tighter against her chest. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't know you. You could be worse than the wolves." "I could be," Silas agreed. He didn't argue it. That more than anything made her believe him. A bad man tells you he's good. "But I'm not. And you're going to freeze to death in that water inside the hour if you stay in it. And you don't look like you've got an hour of fight left in you. So here's how it's going to go." He laid the rifle down on the bank well within her reach and out of his, and she understood he'd done it on purpose, so she'd see his hands were the only weapons left, and they were empty. "I'm going to pick you up," he said, "and carry you up to my cabin where there's a fire and a dry bed and some broth on the stove. I'm not going to ask you your name or your story or where you're headed, because none of that matters tonight. Tonight, all that matters is you don't die. You can tell me to go to hell if you want. I'll leave the rifle and walk off and you can take your chances. But I'd be obliged if you'd let me carry you, ma'am, on account of I don't much care to find your bones down here come morning." Abigail looked at him for a long moment. In her whole life, no one had ever asked her permission for anything. Della gave orders. Her father gave silence. The world gave her its back. This stranger, this rough, silent mountain man with a rifle and a face she couldn't see, was kneeling in the gravel, asking her leave to save her life. The stone slipped out of her hands and clattered down onto the rocks. "My leg," she whispered. "It doesn't work right. Never has. That's why they—" She stopped. She made herself say the true thing, the thing she'd been carrying for 3 days. "They said I was too heavy to be worth the trouble, too slow and too heavy. You'll hurt yourself lifting me." Silas Boone reached down and got one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees, and he gathered her up out of the creek against his chest, as if she weighed nothing at all, as if the words "too heavy" were a language he'd never learned to speak. "Whoever told you that?" he said low, close to her ear, standing up with her held tight against him, the water streaming off both of them. "Was a liar and a fool. You hear me? A liar and a fool. There ain't a thing about you too heavy for me to carry." And Abigail Turner, who had not let herself be held by another human being since before her mother died, who had survived 3 days of sun and snakes and wolves on cornbread and spite, put her face against the rough wool of a stranger's shoulder and wept like the bottom had fallen out of the world. He carried her up the mountain in the dark, and he didn't say one word the whole way, and he didn't set her down once to rest, and she could feel under her cheek that he was strong and steady, and that his heart was hammering. Not with the strain of her weight, she'd realize later, but with something else. some old grief of his own, that the feel of a broken woman in his arms had cracked back open. But that was a thing she'd learn later. That night, she only knew that she was warm, and that she was rising up out of the dark toward a light she could see now far up the slope, a single yellow window glowing in the side of the mountain. The cabin was small and tight and smelled of wood smoke and pine and something stewing. He carried her through the door and laid her down on a bed against the wall on a real mattress with a real blanket, and he knelt and pulled off her ruined shoes, and he brought a basin of warm water and a clean cloth and set them by the bed. "I'll step out," he said, "while you get yourself clean and into something dry. There's a shirt of mine on that peg. It'll swallow you, but it's dry." He stood in the doorway with his back to her, looking out at the night, a courtesy she would never have expected from any man in Della's world. "I'll be right outside. You holler if you need helping up." "Mr. Boone," she said. He stopped. He didn't turn around. "Why?" she said. The whole question was in that one word. Why did you come down? Why did you leave the rifle? Why did you carry me? Why did you, when no one ever has? When my own blood wouldn't, why did a stranger? Silas Boone was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. 10 years back, he finally said to the dark beyond the door, "I had somebody I loved more than my own life, and I didn't get to her in time. There was a slide on the north face, and I dug with my hands till they bled, and I didn't get to her in time." His voice didn't break. It was worse than breaking. It was the flat, even voice of a man who'd cried all his crying out a decade ago and had nothing left but the fact. "I've spent 10 years up on this mountain telling myself there wasn't a thing I could have done. Tonight I heard wolves, and I came down, and there was a person dying in that creek who I could do something about. So I did." He paused. "That's the whole of it, ma'am. Don't make it more than it is." Then he stepped out and pulled the door to behind him and left her alone with the fire and the broth and the dry shirt and the first kindness anyone had shown her in longer than she could remember. Abigail cleaned herself with the warm cloth, her hands shaking, and pulled his shirt on over her head, and it did swallow her. It came down past her knees and smelled of him, of cedar and smoke and clean sweat, and she crawled under the blanket, and she was warm all the way through for the first time in 3 days. When he came back in, she was sitting up against the wall, with the blanket pulled to her chin, watching him, because old habits don't die in one night, and a woman raised in Della's house watches the people in a room with her. He didn't seem to mind the watching. He went to the stove and ladled broth into a tin cup, and brought it to her without a word, and put it in her 2 hands, and made sure she had it before he let go. "Small sips," he said. "You been 3 days empty. Your stomach's forgot what to do with food. You go too fast, you'll lose it all, and we'll be right back where we started." She sipped. It was venison broth, rich and salted, and it was so good that tears came up in her eyes again, and she had to stop and breathe. "You don't talk much," she said. "No, ma'am. My family talked all the time," she said. "Della especially. Talk all day about everything I did wrong. How I ate too much and moved too slow and cost too much to keep." She sipped again, looking at him over the rim of the cup. "I think I'd rather have a man who don't talk at all than one more word out of her." Something moved across Silas Boone's face, then in the firelight, the first crack in it she'd seen. "Where were they headed?" he asked. "Your people. West. Oregon, Pa said. Land out there, he said. A new start." She laughed that broken laugh again. "Guess I was the old thing they were starting over from." "They'll have figured you're dead by now," Silas said. It wasn't cruel. It was just true, laid out plain, the way he laid everything out. 3 days in this country, no horse, no water. They'll have told themselves you're dead, and they'll have stopped thinking about you. That's how people do a thing like that, and still sleep at night. They bury you in their minds so they don't have to carry you. Abigail was quiet. She turned the warm cup in her hands. "Then I reckon," she said slowly, "I'm a ghost." "How's that?" "A dead woman that's still walking around." She looked up at him, and something had come into her face that hadn't been there an hour ago in the creek. Something that the broth and the fire and the dry shirt and the strange flat kindness of this strange flat man had put there. "They buried me. So I don't owe them a thing anymore, do I? A ghost don't owe the living. A ghost is free. Silas Boone looked at her for a long moment across the small, warm room. No, he said. I don't reckon a ghost owes anybody a thing. He took the empty cup from her hands and set it by the stove and banked the fire down for the night. And he laid out a bedroll for himself on the floor by the door, putting the whole width of the cabin between them, another courtesy, another small careful kindness, in a night that had been full of them. Mr. Boone, she said into the dark when the lamp was out. Ma'am? My name's Abigail. Abigail Turner. I figure if a man's going to carry me up a mountain and feed me his own supper, he ought to know what to call me. A pause in the dark. The fire ticked. Abigail, he said like he was trying the shape of it. All right. Get some sleep, Abigail. You're not going anywhere tonight, and there's nothing up here can get to you that don't come through me first. And for the first time in more years than she could count, Abigail Turner closed her eyes in a safe place under a warm blanket, with a good man's word standing watch between her and the dark, and she did not dream of wagon wheels turning away from her into the mountains. She slept like the dead. Like a ghost who had finally, after 3 days and 24 years, found a reason to come back to life. Morning came to the mountain the way mercy comes to a hard life, slow and quiet and almost unbelievable. Abigail woke, not knowing where she was. For one terrible heartbeat, she was back on the flat, back in the dust, back watching the wagon shrink, and her whole body seized up tight as a fist. Then she smelled the wood smoke and the cedar, and felt the dry blanket against her skin, and it came back to her in pieces. The creek, the wolves, the rifle shot, the man. She sat up too fast, and her hip caught fire, and she gasped. Easy. He was at the stove with his back to her, and he hadn't turned around, but he'd heard her. Of course he'd heard her. She was learning already that Silas Boone heard everything. You move slow this morning, he said. 3 days of what you've been through, your body's spent down to nothing. You try to jump up and go to work, you'll just fall down again, and then I'll have to pick you up a second time, and my back's not what it was. I wasn't going to jump up and go to work. No. He turned then with a tin plate in his hand, and there was something close to a smile buried somewhere in his beard. Then you're the first guest I've had in 10 years that didn't. How many guests have you had in 10 years? None, he said, and set the plate in front of her. You're the first. It was eggs, real eggs, 2 of them, and a slab of fried cornmeal mush, and she stared at it like he'd laid a king's feast in front of her. You keep chickens, she said. 6 hens and a rooster mean as a snake. They earn their keep mostly. He pulled a stool over and sat across from her, his own plate balanced on his knee. Eat slow, same as last night. Your belly's still half asleep. She ate slow because he told her to, and because she didn't trust it not to disappear if she ate too fast. She'd learned that in Della's house too, how a good thing could be snatched back the second you got comfortable with it. She watched him while she ate, and he let her watch the same as he had the night before. You're waiting for me to tell you to leave, she said finally. He looked up. Am I? Everybody does, sooner or later. You feed a body a meal or 2, and then it's time for them to move along. She set her fork down. So just say it. I'd rather know now than get comfortable and find out later. Where's the nearest town I'll start walking soon as I can stand? Silas chewed his mush and swallowed, and looked at her with those flat, steady eyes for a good long while. Nearest town's Hollow Pine, he said. 18 miles down the mountain. Down the same kind of country that near killed you the last 3 days, except worse on account of you'd be walking it on a hip that don't work and a body that's got nothing left in it. He set his own plate aside. So no, you're not walking anywhere. Not today, not this week, maybe not this month. You're going to stay right here and get your strength back, and when you're strong enough to leave, then we'll talk about leaving, and not 1 minute before. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. I won't take charity. And that finally was the thing that moved him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and his voice when it came was low and rough and meant. Good, he said. I don't hold with charity either. Never have. Charity's just a way for the giver to feel big and the taker to feel small, and I've got no use for either feeling. He nodded at the room around them, the small, tight cabin with its 10 years of bachelor neglect. The dust in the corners, the chinking gone bad between the logs, the leather hinges worn soft. "But I'll tell you what I have got. I've got more work up here than one man can do, and not enough day to do it in. So you don't owe me Charity Abigail Turner. You owe me work soon as you're able. That's a debt I'll let you carry." "Fair." She looked at his outstretched hand. It was a big hand scarred across the knuckles hard as a hoof. She took it. "Fair," she said. And that one word, that one handshake, was the first brick they laid of a thing neither of them yet had a name for. She was able sooner than he expected, sooner than she had any right to be. By the third day, she was on her feet, leaning on a cane he'd whittled for her out of mountain ash, without being asked, a cane that fit her grip exactly, because she'd watched him measure her hand with his eyes and known what he was doing. By the fourth day, she'd taken over the cooking, because she found his cooking, while it kept a man alive, was a sin against good food. By the end of the first week, she had gone through his cabin like a hard wind, and Silas Boone came in from splitting wood one evening to find a home where a hovel had stood that morning. "I moved your traps," she said before he could speak, braced for anger. Because in Della's house, a woman who moved a man's things got the back of a hand for it. They were under the bed, and the rust was getting into them. "I oiled them and hung them on the wall by the door where they belong. And your flour had weevils, so I sifted the whole barrel and—" She stopped. "You're not saying anything." "No," Silas said. "Are you angry?" He looked around the cabin, the swept floor, the mended curtain over the window that hadn't had a curtain that morning, the smell of something good on the stove, instead of the smell of dust and old grease and a man living alone too long. "My fiancée," he said, and Abigail went still, because in a week he had not once spoken of the woman from the Creekside story, the one under the slide. Her name was Ruth. She used to say a house wasn't a home till a woman had been angry in it, till she'd moved a man's things and made him eat his vegetables and put a curtain up he didn't ask for. His voice had gone strange. "I haven't thought of that in 10 years. Not till just now, walking in that door." Abigail didn't know what to say, so she said the true thing, the way he always said the true thing. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring her back to you. I'll put it all how it was if—" "No." He said it sharp, then softer. "No. Leave it. Leave it how you've got it." He hung his axe on the wall in the new place she'd made for it, the right place. "It's a good thing you've done here. I'd forgot what a good thing it was. Now what's that on the stove that smells like that?" And just like that, the storm passed, and they ate her stew at his table, and something in the cabin had shifted that neither one of them remarked on the way. You don't remark on the weather warming a degree at a time, until one day you notice you've taken off your coat. But a mountain in summer does not let two people heal in peace. It was 9 days in on a morning when she'd gone down to the garden patch by the creek that she'd started clearing the day before, when she heard the rattle. She knew the sound now. She knew it in her spine. She froze with the hoe half raised and turned her head slow, the way she'd learned at the seep, and there it was, coiled in the squash vines, a foot from her bare ankle, thick as her wrist tail, standing up and singing its dry song of death. "Silas." She didn't shout it. She'd learned that too. She said it loud and flat and steady so it would carry up the slope to where he was mending fence. "Silas, don't run. Walk. There's a rattler at my foot and I can't move." She heard the fence rail drop. She heard his boots not running, walking fast and heavy and certain, and the snake heard them too, and drew its head back further, and Abigail looked down at it, and made the choice that she would later understand changed everything between them. She did not wait to be rescued. She brought the hoe down. She brought it down hard and clean and true, the way her grandmother had shown her on the farm a lifetime ago. And she took the snake's head off against the dirt in a single stroke, and the body whipped and coiled around the blade, and she stepped back, shaking, and let it die. When Silas came around the corner of the cabin at a dead walk with his rifle up, what he found was a woman standing over a dead rattlesnake with a hoe in her hands, and her chin up and her eyes bright. He stopped. He lowered the rifle. "I had it," she said. Her voice only shook a little. I didn't need... I want you to know I called you. I wasn't being foolish. But then it drew back to strike and I couldn't wait, so I had it." Silas Boone looked at the dead snake and looked at the woman, and something happened in his face that she'd never seen on a man's face in her direction in her whole life. It took her a moment to name it because she'd never had it pointed at her before. It was admiration. "Whoever told you that you were slow?" he said quietly. "Never saw you swing a hoe." She laughed, and it came out shaky and wet, and she sat down right there in the dirt next to the dead snake because her legs wouldn't hold her, and Silas crouched down next to her, not touching her, just there, just close. The way he'd learned was the only kind of close she could stand yet. "My grandmother taught me that," she said. "How to take a snake. She used to say a farm woman that can't kill a snake is just a snake's dinner waiting to happen." She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "Della made me forget I knew how to do anything. 3 years I lived in that house, and I forgot I was a person who knew how to do things, forgot I had a grandmother who taught me, forgot I had hands." "You've got hands," Silas said. "I've got hands," she agreed, and looked at the dead snake, and laughed again, stronger this time. "And we've got snake meat for supper if you can stand it. Grandmother could make a rattler taste like chicken if you didn't tell anybody what it was first." Silas Boone threw back his head and laughed a great rusty bark of a laugh that sounded like it hurt him coming out like a thing that hadn't been used in years and had gone stiff in the joints. "Abigail Turner," he said, getting up, offering her his hand, "I do believe you're going to be the saving of this place." He didn't know how true that was. Neither of them did. Not yet. The summer wore on, and they fell into a rhythm, the two of them, the way two people do, who are each carrying a wound and have learned to walk so as not to bump the others. She cooked and gardened and mended and made the cabin a home. He hunted and chopped and hauled and built, and slowly, a board at a time, started fixing the things he'd let go for 10 years, because a man living alone has no reason to fix a thing, and a man with someone to fix it for finds he has every reason in the world. They worked through the long hot days mostly in silence because he wasn't a talker, and she'd had a belly full of talk in Della's house, but it was a good silence, a full one. And now and again it would break open, and one of them would say a true thing, and the other would catch it and hold it, and then the silence would close back over and they'd go on. She learned his story in pieces, the way you learn anything worth knowing. Ruth had been a school teacher down in Hollow Pine. He'd come down off the mountain once a season for supplies, and seen her teaching the town's children their letters through the schoolhouse window. And he'd taken to coming down more than once a season until the whole town was talking about the wild mountain man courting Miss Ruth. And she hadn't cared what the town said. She'd married him in the spring and come up the mountain to live. And for 2 years the cabin had been a home, the home Abigail had unknowingly rebuilt. Then there'd been a wet spring, the north face heavy with snow, gone to slush, and Ruth had gone up to gather the early greens that grew there, and the slope had let go. "I was a half-mile off splitting rails," Silas said. He said it to the fire, not to her, the way he said all the hardest things. "I heard it come down. Sound like the whole world clearing its throat. I knew where she'd gone. I ran. I dug." He held up his hands and looked at them in the firelight. "Dug with these till the nails come off. Found her just before dark. Too late. Hours too late. She'd have gone quick, the doctor said after, when I carried her down. Quick and cold, and she'd not have known much. He meant it kind." His jaw worked. "Wasn't kind. There's no kind way to say a thing like that. She went up that hill alive and I brought her down dead, and there wasn't one thing in between I could have done different. And that's the part that's kept me up here 10 years. Not the grief. A man can live with grief. It's the helplessness. Standing in the world and not being able to do the one thing that mattered." Abigail was quiet a long while. "That's why you came down to the creek," she said. "For the wolves." "That's why I came down to the creek." "Because you couldn't dig fast enough for her, so you weren't going to be too slow for me." Silas Boone looked at her across the fire, and his eyes were wet the first time she'd seen it, and he didn't wipe them or turn away. "You see clear, Abigail," he said. "Clearer than most." "Yeah, that's the size of it. I couldn't save her, so I saved you. Don't make me more than I am. I'm a selfish man. I did it for me as much as you." "No," Abigail said. "You did it for both of us, and that's not selfish. That's just two people drowning grabbing the same rope." She reached across the small space between them, and she put her hand over his scarred hand, the first time she had touched him by her own choosing, and he went very still, like a wild thing that's decided to let itself be touched. "You're not too slow, Silas Boone. You hear me? You're not too slow, and I'm not too heavy, and between the two of us we're going to be just fine." He turned his hand over under hers, slow, careful, and held it, and they sat like that by the fire a long time, and neither one said anything more, because some things are too big to put words to, and they'd both learned that the hard way. It might have stayed gentle. It might have been a long, slow summer of healing. But the world that left her on the flat had not finished with Abigail Turner. The rider came on a Tuesday. She was hanging wash on the line he'd strung for her when she saw the dust on the lower trail, and she went cold all over, because nobody came up this mountain. Silas had told her, nobody in 10 years, and her first thought, her gut thought, the thought that came up out of 3 days on the flat, was, they've come back to make sure. "Silas," she called, and there was a note in it that brought him out of the shed at a run. "Rider, coming up the trail, just one." He looked at the dust, and his face went hard in a way she hadn't seen the soft thing she'd been coaxing out of him all summer, folding back down under something older and colder. "Get in the cabin," he said. "Silas, Abigail." He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice, but there was iron in it. "Get in the cabin and bar the door, and don't open it for anybody but me. I don't know who that is. 10 years nobody's had reason to come up here. Somebody's got a reason now, and I'd as soon know what it is before they get a look at you." She went in. She barred the door. But she watched through the gap in the curtain she'd hung, because she was done in her life with not watching, and what she saw made her heart climb up into her throat. The rider was a thin man in town clothes, a black coat too warm for the season, a flat-crowned hat, a leather case strapped behind his saddle. He drew up in the yard and didn't get down. And he looked at the cabin, and the wash on the line, and the garden by the creek, and the mended fences, with an expression Abigail couldn't read from inside, but Silas could read it fine, and Silas didn't like it. "Help you," Silas said. He had his rifle, but he held it down along his leg, polite, not pointed just there. "Mr. Boone." The thin man's voice was smooth, town smooth, lawyer smooth. "Silas Boone." "Who's asking?" "My name is Pruitt. I represent the Hollow Pine Land and Cattle Company." The man smiled, and even from inside the cabin, Abigail didn't like the smile. "I've ridden up to discuss a matter of some opportunity to you, sir. A matter of your land. I've got no business with any company." "Ah, but you might want some." Pruitt swung down off his horse now uninvited, and Silas didn't stop him, but he didn't welcome him either, and the air in the yard had gone tight as a drawn wire. "You hold title to a great deal of this mountain, Mr. Boone, 2,000 acres by the county records, acquired by your father and held by you, including, if I'm not mistaken, the whole of the north and east faces and the water rights to Cooper's Creek. What of it?" "What of it?" Pruitt repeated pleasantly. "Mr. Boone, there's copper in this mountain. The company's surveyors are quite certain of it. And the company is prepared to make you an offer for your land that would let a man like you live like a king for the rest of his days. Anywhere you chose. Down in the warm country. By the sea, if you liked." He spread his thin hands. "Surely a man living alone up here, a man getting on in years, would rather—" "No." Pruitt blinked. "I haven't named a figure." "Don't need a figure." Silas's voice was flat and final as a closing door. "Land's not for sale. Wasn't yesterday. Won't be tomorrow. You've had a long ride up for nothing, Mr. Pruitt, and you've got a long ride back. I'd start it before the heat comes up." And here the thin man's smile changed, and Abigail, watching through the curtain, felt the cold come back into her bones, because she had seen that change before. She had seen it on Della's face 100 times. The moment when sweet talk failed, and the real thing underneath showed its teeth. "Mr. Boone," Pruitt said softly, "I'd ask you to consider carefully. The company is a patient partner but a poor enemy. Men who hold out against progress have a way of finding their lives grow. Complicated. Fires start in dry summers. Title gets disputed. Accidents happen on lonely mountains to men who live alone. He let that sit. I'd hate for anything to happen to your charming little homestead here, or to whoever it is hangs your wash. His eyes flicked just once to the line of clean clothes, and to one garment among them that was plainly a woman's, and his smile widened a hair. I was given to understand you lived alone. The county will be interested to learn otherwise. A man's circumstances do affect his vulnerabilities. Abigail's blood ran ice. He'd seen her dress on the line. He knew there was a woman and a man like that. A company like that would dig and learn. She had no claim, no papers, no standing. A woman who'd vanished off a wagon train and was presumed dead. A woman they could use against Silas any way they pleased. She watched Silas Boone's hand tighten on the rifle, and for one terrible second, she thought he was going to do murder right there in the yard, and she put her hand on the bar of the door to throw it back and stop him. But Silas didn't raise the rifle. He did something worse to a man like Pruitt. He smiled. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "gentle as you please. You've made a long ride to threaten a man on his own ground, and that tells me your company's in more of a hurry than it's letting on. A patient company don't threaten. A patient company waits. You're not waiting. Which means you need this mountain more than you're saying. And that means I've got something you want bad, and a man who's got something the other fellow wants bad has got no reason in the world to be scared." He took one step forward, and Pruitt took one step back, and the whole shape of the thing shifted in that single step. "Now, you get on your horse, and you ride back down to whoever sent you, and you tell them Silas Boone said no. And you tell them that the next man they send up my mountain to make threats had best come ready to back them, because I buried the last man who threatened me on this land 20 years ago, and the ground up here takes a body just fine." It was a lie. Abigail knew it was a lie. Silas had buried no one. But Pruitt didn't know that, and the flat, certain way Silas said it, the same flat, certain way he said true things, made it land like truth, and the thin man's smooth face went a shade paler. He got on his horse. "You'll regret this, Boone," he said, but his voice had lost its silk. "Reckon I'll regret a lot of things before I'm done," Silas said. "This won't make the top of the list. Ride safe now. It's a long way down and the trail's narrow in places. Be a shame if your horse put a foot wrong." Pruitt rode. He rode fast, and he didn't look back. And Silas Boone stood in his yard and watched the dust go down the mountain until it was gone, and only then did he let his shoulders come down, and only then did Abigail throw back the bar and come out and cross the yard to him at the fastest hobble her hip would allow. "Silas, Silas, what was that? What did he mean copper? What land?" "Inside," he said. "Not out here. A man like that leaves, and you don't know if he's got a friend in the rocks with a long gun. Inside." They went in. He barred the door himself this time, and that told her more than anything how much the visit had rattled him, this man, who'd left a rifle on a creek bank for a stranger. "Sit," he said, and she sat, and he stood by the cold stove with his hands flat on it, and his head down, and he told her, "My father came up this mountain 40 years back with nothing but a mule and a dream, and he filed on every acre of it. He could get the county to give him 2,000 acres, because back then land was cheap and a man could dream big and cheap." He spoke slow. "He died when I was 26 and left it all to me. I never did one thing with it, but live on it. 2,000 acres, and I farm one and hunt the rest. Never wanted more. Never wanted anything but quiet." He turned. "But that company's been buying up this whole range 3 years now, parcel by parcel, squeezing out the little homesteaders, the families. Burning some out, buying some cheap after the fires, disputing titles in a county court they've got bought and paid for. And I sat up here on my mountain and let them, because it wasn't my fight, and the families that got burned out weren't my family, and I'd learned my lesson about caring for people you can lose." His voice cracked then the first time on that last word. "And now they've come for mine," he said. "The water rights. Cooper's Creek waters half this range. They get my land. They get the water, they control every homestead downstream, they can dry out the rest and buy them for nothing. I'm the cork in the bottle, Abigail. I've been the cork in the bottle for 3 years and never knew it. And now they know I'm here, and now—" He stopped. He looked at her. "And now they know you're here. I'm nobody," Abigail said. "I'm a dead woman off a wagon train. I've got no papers, no claim, nothing for them to use. That's exactly what they'll use." Silas crossed to her and crouched down in front of her, the way he did when a thing was too important to say standing up. "Listen to me. A woman with no papers and no claim, and presumed dead, living up here with a man she's not married to on land a company wants. That's not nothing to a man like Pruitt. That's a lever. They'll go to that bought judge and they'll say, I'm harboring a missing woman, or worse, that I did her harm, that I'm the reason a wagon train lost a daughter on the flats. They'll twist it any way that gets them this mountain. They don't care about the truth. They care about the copper. And you, Abigail." He took her hands, both of them in his scarred ones. "You are the cleanest weapon they've ever been handed, and it's my fault because I hung your wash on a line where the whole world could see it." The fear came up in her. Then the old wagon flat fear, and she fought it down the way she'd learned to fight everything down, one breath at a time, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Then we don't run," she said. Silas blinked. "Abigail, no, you listen to me now." She gripped his hands back hard. "My whole life people have decided I was a thing to be moved out of the way. Too slow, too heavy, too much trouble, leave her on the flat. She won't make it anyhow. And every time, every single time, somebody else decided what I was worth, and where I belonged, and whether I got to stay. And I'm done with it, Silas. I am done being a thing that gets moved. You hear me?" Her eyes were burning. "You want to protect me, you don't do it by hiding me or sending me off down some mountain in the dark. You do it by standing next to me and letting me stand next to you. Because I'd rather die fighting on this mountain that fed me and healed me and gave me back my own 2 hands than live one more day as somebody's inconvenience to be carried off and left behind. I'm not running. If they come, they'll find 2 of us, and one of us can take a snake's head off with a hoe." For a long moment, Silas Boone just looked at her kneeling there on his cabin floor holding her hands. Then he did a thing he had not done all summer, a thing he had not done in 10 years. He pulled her in slow, giving her every chance to stop him, and when she didn't stop him, when instead, she leaned in to meet him. He put his arms around her and held her against his chest, and he pressed his rough cheek against her hair, and Abigail Turner, who had been carried up a mountain by this man's strength, learned that she could also be held by it, which was a different thing, and a harder thing, and the thing she'd wanted her whole life without ever having the word for it. "All right," he said into her hair, his voice gone thick. "All right, we don't run." "We don't run," she agreed. 2 of us. 2 of us. He held her out at arm's length, then, and looked at her, and for the first time all summer, there was something in his weathered face that wasn't grief, and wasn't guilt, and wasn't the careful, flat kindness of a man tending a wounded thing. It was hope. Terrible, dangerous, 10 years buried hope. "You scare me, woman," he said. "Good," she said. "About time something did besides your own ghosts." And he laughed again, that rusty bark, and the fear in the cabin didn't go away, because the fear was real, and Pruitt was real, and the company was real, and out there beyond the door, a whole bought county was turning its slow machinery toward this mountain. But the fear had to share the room now with something else, something they'd built a brick at a time all summer without naming it, and the something else was bigger. That night, she didn't sleep well. She lay awake listening to the mountain, every owl and every cracking branch. Suddenly, a man with a long gun in the rocks, and somewhere past midnight, she heard Silas get up off his bedroll by the door, and she heard him take the rifle, and she heard the door open soft and close soft. She got up. She went to the window. He was standing in the yard in the dark in his shirt sleeves, the rifle in the crook of his arm, looking down the mountain. The way a man looks down a road he knows trouble is coming up. Standing watch. Standing watch over her, the way he'd promised that first night that nothing could get to her that didn't come through him first. She watched him a while. Then she lit the lamp low and put coffee on. And when he came in an hour later, cold and grim, there was a hot cup waiting and a woman awake to hand it to him, and Silas Boone stopped in the doorway and looked at the lit lamp and the coffee and the woman, and something came apart in his chest that had been held together with wire and grief for 10 long years. "Ruth used to do that," he said, his voice rough. "Wait up, have the coffee on." "I know," Abigail said gently. "You told me. Sit down, Silas, drink your coffee. I'll keep you company. A man shouldn't stand watch alone." He sat, he drank. And after a while in the low lamplight, with the trouble gathering down the mountain and the long fight surely coming, he reached across the little table and took her hand, and she let him, and they sat together in the warm, small circle of the lamp. Two people who'd each been left for dead by their own lives, and had found against every odd, against snake and wolf and sun and grief, and a whole bought county, that they were not alone after all. "I'm glad it was your dress on that line," Silas said. "What?" "Pruitt. He saw your dress. That's how he knows you're here, and that's the danger of it. And I said today it was my fault for hanging your wash where the world could see." He turned her hand over in his. "But I've been sitting out there in the dark thinking on it, and I find I'm not sorry. I'm glad it was your dress on that line. I'm glad the whole world can see there's a woman on this mountain again. 10 years I hid up here so nobody'd know I was alive enough to lose anything. And you come along and hang your wash out where God and the company and everybody can see it, and I find I'd rather have something to lose and have to fight for it than have nothing and be safe." He looked up at her. "That's your doing, Abigail. You hung your wash on my line and made me a man with something to lose again. I don't know whether to thank you for it or curse you." "Thank me," Abigail said, "when it's over, when we've won." "Thank me then." "You're awful sure we'll win." "No," she said honestly. "I'm not sure at all. But I'm sure I'd rather lose with you than win alone, and that's a thing I never thought I'd get to feel about another living soul, so I'll take the fight that comes with it." She squeezed his hand. "Now finish your coffee. The sun'll be up in 2 hours, and there's a fence still down on the east line and a company that wants our water, and a body can't fight a war on no sleep and a cold breakfast." Silas Boone finished his coffee, and in the gray hour before dawn the two of them sat in the lamplight and made their plans, a mountain man who'd learned how to lose, and a woman who'd learned how to survive, drawing close against the dark that was coming. Neither one of them alone anymore, both of them, for the first time in their broken lives, choosing exactly where they stood and exactly who they stood beside. The lamp burned down low between them, and the coffee went cold in the pot, and out beyond the door the mountain held its breath, and Abigail Turner, who her family had left to die under the summer sun, sat in a warm cabin. She had made a home holding the hand of a man who had carried her out of a creek and called her worth carrying. And she understood finally and all at once that the version of her they'd abandoned on the flat had died out there after all. And the woman who'd walked out of that wilderness in her place was somebody altogether new and a great deal harder to leave behind. The plans they made by lamplight held for 11 days. On the 12th, the wind changed, and it brought the smell of smoke. Abigail caught it first, the way she caught most things now, with the part of her that had learned on the flat to read the world for what it meant to do to her. She was pulling weeds in the garden when she lifted her head and went still, and Silas, mending the chicken run a few yards off, saw her go still and dropped his hammer. "What?" "Smoke," she said. "Not ours. Ours is cold. I haven't lit it." She turned a slow circle, testing the air. "There. East. And it's not a cook fire, Silas. It's too much. It's too much smoke for any one fire a man would light on purpose." Silas came to her side and lifted his own face to the wind, and what he smelled there put a thing into his eyes she'd not seen before, not for Pruitt, not for the wolves, a thing that was nearer to terror than anything she'd watched cross that weathered face all summer. "Drought's been 3 months," he said low. "Whole range as dry as tinder. One spark in the wrong gully with this wind behind it." He didn't finish. He grabbed her hand. "Up the rise. I need to see it." He half pulled her up the slope behind the cabin to the bald knob where a man could see the whole eastern range, and when they came over the top of it, Abigail's heart dropped clean through the floor of her. The mountain 3 miles off was burning. Not a column of smoke, a wall. A wall of dirty brown haze a mile wide, rising up off the eastern slopes, and leaning toward them, leaning hard, pushed by the same wind that had carried her. The smell, and at the base of it, where the haze met the land, there was a line of orange that moved. "God above," Silas said. "God above. Look at it run." "How fast?" Abigail's mouth had gone dry. "Silas, how fast is that coming?" "Fast as the wind pushes it, and the wind's pushing it right up this valley." Bus-to-ti-bus-er. He was already turning, already moving, pulling her back down the slope toward the cabin, his mind visibly racing ahead of his feet. "Listen to me, listen. That fire's between us and the high country, so we can't run up. The only way out is down the valley toward Hollow Pine, and the valley's full of homesteads, the Dunmores and the Aldous family and old Pettigrew and the Hatch place with all those children. And not one of them can see that fire yet on account of the ridge that's between them and it, and by the time they smell it, it'll be on them." He stopped dead and looked at her, and the choice was right there in his face, plain as print. "Abigail, I can put you on the mule and send you down the valley right now, fast ahead of it, and you'll make Hollow Pine, and you'll be safe. Or I can ride that valley warning folks and trying to get them out, and that's slow, and that's dangerous, and the fire might catch us all in it. I can save you for certain, or I can try to save everybody and maybe lose us both. And I won't choose it for you. Not this. You tell me. You tell me right now." And here was the moment. Here was the thing the whole summer had been building toward, without either of them knowing it. A man asking her instead of deciding for her. A man laying her own life in her own 2 hands. Abigail did not hesitate. "How many children at the Hatch place?" 5, 6. The youngest's not walking yet." "Then we ride the valley," Abigail said. "Both of us. And we get every last one of them out, and we don't leave a single soul behind, because I know what it is to be the one left behind, Silas Boone, and I will burn before I do that to a child." For 1/2 second, something broke open in his face, some last wall. And then it was gone, and he was moving, and so was she. "Saddle the mule and the horse," he called over his shoulder, already running for the shed. "Wet down every blanket we've got and roll them tight. Fill the canteens. Anything you can't carry, leave it. It's just things burn and people don't have to. Go, Abigail, go." She went. She had never moved so fast on her bad hip in her life, and she didn't feel. It didn't feel it at all, because there are times the body forgets its own pain, and this was one. And inside of 10 minutes, they were both mounted with wet blankets, rolled behind the saddles and canteens full, and the chickens turned loose to fend for themselves, and the cabin door standing open behind them, the home she'd made all summer, abandoned to whatever the fire decided to do with it. She looked back at it once. "It's just a thing," she told herself the way Silas had said it. "It's just a thing. People don't have to burn." And she turned the mule's head down the valley and rode into the smoke. The Dunmore place was first. They came pounding into the yard, and Silas was off his horse before it had stopped hammering on the door, shouting, and Jeb Dunmore came out blinking with his suspenders down and his wife behind him. And the second the man got a look at the eastern sky over the ridge, his face came apart. "Fire," Silas said. "Coming up the valley fast. You've got maybe an hour, maybe less. Get your family, get your animals if they'll come easy, and leave them if they won't, and ride for Hollow Pine. Don't pack, don't stop. Go now, and go fast, and tell every soul you pass." "My God," Dunmore said. "My God, the children." "Go," Abigail said from the mule, and there was a snap of command in her voice that surprised even her. A thing she'd never have dared in Della's house, a thing the summer had grown in her. "Mrs. Dunmore, your little ones put the baby in a sling against your chest, and the next one behind you on the saddle and ride. We'll see the older ones onto the wagon. Move now. The fire doesn't care that you're scared. Move." And the woman moved because Abigail told her to in a voice that left no room. And inside of 10 minutes, the Dunmores were on the road, and Silas and Abigail were riding hard for the next place and the next, and the smoke was thicker now, and the orange line was no longer 3 miles off. It was 2. The Aldous family they caught at the road already half out, warned by a Dunmore boy who'd galloped ahead, and they waved them on toward Pettigrew's. Old Pettigrew was deaf and stubborn, and wouldn't leave his hogs, and Silas wasted 4 precious minutes arguing with him before Abigail rode the mule straight into the hog pen and opened the gate and drove the whole squealing lot of them out onto the road, and Pettigrew, faced with chasing his hogs or losing them, chose his hogs and chose thereby to live. "You're a hard woman," Silas said as they rode on, and there was admiration under it. "I'm a live one," Abigail said. "I aim to keep being one, and to keep that mean old man being one, 2 hogs and all." Then they came over the last rise to the Hatch place, and Abigail's blood turned to water in her veins, because the fire had come faster than even Silas reckoned. It had jumped the ridge a half-mile east, the wind throwing burning brands ahead of itself, and the dry grass between the ridge and the Hatch homestead was already alight, a creeping orange tide coming across the field toward the house, and the Hatch family was not riding out. They were trapped. She could see them as the yard, tiny against the smoke, the father beating at the grass edge with a wet sack, the mother clutching the baby. The children scattered and screaming, and the only road out the road, back toward Hollow Pine, already cut by a tongue of flame that had run ahead through the dry creek grass and now burned across it shoulder high. "They're cut off," Silas said, and for the first time all day, his voice held something close to despair. "The road's gone. The fires took the road." "Then we make another way," Abigail said. "There is no other way. The field's burning east. The road's burning west. The only thing not burning is—" He stopped. His head came up. "The river." "What river?" "Cooper's Creek runs the bottom of the Hatch land. It's low with the drought, but it's there, it's water, and water don't burn." He was already kicking his horse forward. "If we can get them down to the creek bed, the fire'll burn around them, over them, the water'll hold. But somebody's got to get down there and hold those folks together and keep them in the water while the fire passes over, and keep the little ones from running, because a child's first thought in a fire is to run, and running's what kills them." "I'll do it," Abigail said. "Abigail, I'll do it." She wheeled the mule. "You can't be 2 places, Silas. Somebody's got to break that fire on the road so the next folks down the valley have a way out, and that's a man's strength and a man's work, and it has to be you. And somebody's got to get 6 children into a creek and keep them calm and keep them there, and that's me, because I'm the one who knows how it feels to think you're going to die, and I'm the one can look a scared child in the eye and make them believe me. So you break the fire and I'll hold the creek, and we'll meet on the far side of this, both of us. You hear me? Both of us. Say it." "Both of us," Silas said, and his voice cracked on it, and then he reached across the gap between their horses and grabbed the back of her neck and pulled her in and pressed his forehead to hers, hard 1 second, the smoke rolling around them and the children screaming below. "You come back to me," he said. "You hear I dug a woman out of a mountain once too late. I won't do it twice. You hold that creek and you come back to me, Abigail Turner." "I'll come back," she said. "I always come back. Ask my family." And then she peeled away from him and drove the mule down the slope into the smoke toward the burning field and the trapped family and the screaming children. And Silas Boone watched her go for 1/2 second that cost him everything. And then he turned his horse the other way toward the road, toward the wall of flame he had to break, and the 2 of them rode apart into the fire. The heat hit her like a wall before she was halfway down. She'd thought she knew heat. 3 days on the flat had taught her heat. This was something else. This was the breath of a living thing that wanted her dead. And the mule balked and screamed and tried to turn, and Abigail laid her heels in and shouted and forced it on down through the smoke eyes streaming into the Hatch yard. "Mr. Hatch," she shouted, sliding off the mule. "Leave the grass. You can't beat it. It's too big. Get your family to the creek down the bottom. There, get them in the water." Hatch turned a soot-black face to her, half-mad with fear. "Who in God's name are you?" "I'm the woman that's going to get your babies to that creek. Now pick up that child and move." She didn't wait for him to obey. She went to the mother first, the one with the baby, because the mother was the anchor, Get the mother moving, and the children follow." "What's your name?" she said, taking the woman by the shoulders, making her see a calm face in the middle of the burning world. Mary. Mary. Mary, look at me. Your babies are going to live, every one. But you have to walk right now down to that creek with the baby and not look back at the fire. Not once, because if you run, the children run, and if they run, they die. So you walk slow and steady, and you sing. You hear me sing something. Sing a hymn loud, so every child can hear their mama singing and know it's not the end of the world. Can you do that?" And the woman, given a thing to do instead of a thing to fear, drew a breath of the burning air and began shaking to sing, and her thin, cracking voice rose up over the roar of the fire, and one by one the scattered, screaming children heard their mother singing and came running to her skirts, because a mother singing means the world has not ended yet. Abigail counted them as they came. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. "Mary!" She kept her voice level as still water. "Mary, you've got 6. Where's the 6th? And Mary Hatch's singing stopped, and her face came apart, and she screamed a name into the smoke. "Tommy!" There was no answer but the roar of the fire. "How old?" Abigail said, gripping her. "How old is Tommy? Where does he hide? Children hide in a fire. Where does he hide?" 4. "He's 4. He hides when he's scared. He hides in the root cellar behind the house." "Oh God, the fire's behind the house, the fire." "Get the others to the creek." Abigail was already moving. "Get them in the water and keep them there and keep singing and do not come after me. Do you understand? Your 5 need their mother. You stay with your 5. I'll get Tommy." "You can't, the fire. I have been left behind," Abigail Turner said, and her voice rang out flat and terrible over the flames. "And I will not leave a child to it. Get to the water. Go." And she turned and ran on her bad hip into the smoke toward the back of the burning house, toward the root cellar, toward a 4-year-old boy hiding from the end of the world. The smoke behind the house was a living dark. She went down on her hands and knees because the air was better low. Another thing the flat had taught her: the world tries to kill you high and spares you a little down near the dirt, and she crawled, coughing, calling his name. "Tommy? Tommy, honey? It's all right. I've come to take you to your mama, Tommy." Nothing. Roar of fire. The crack of the house catching above her. "Tommy, your mama's singing." "Can you hear her? She's singing down at the creek, and she sent me to bring you so you can sing with her." "Where are you, baby? I can't find you. You have to help me find you." And then, small from somewhere ahead in the smoke, a child's voice choked. And tiny, "I'm scared." "I know you are." She crawled toward it, sobbing now herself, the smoke tearing her lungs. "I know you are, baby. I'm scared too, but you know what? When I'm scared, I keep one hand reaching out just like this, reaching out in the dark, and pretty soon somebody takes it. Can you reach out your hand, Tommy? Can you reach out in the dark for me?" And a small hot hand closed around her fingers. She had him. She pulled him to her, this tiny soot-black boy 4 years old, and she crushed him against her chest, and for 1 second she could not move at all for the size of what she felt. This child, this living child she'd found in the dark, this thing she had refused to leave behind, because once upon a time she'd been left and no one came. Somebody had come for Tommy Hatch. She had come. "I've got you," she said into his hair. "I've got you, baby, and I am never letting go. Now hold tight to my neck and don't look up. Keep your face right here against me. We're going to the creek to your mama here. We go." But when she turned to crawl back the way she'd come, the way was gone. The house had fallen. A wall of it had come down across the path behind her in a roar of sparks, and the fire was all around them now, a circle of it closing, and the only gap, the only dark place not yet burning, was the wrong way away from the creek, away from Mary's singing out into the open field, where there was nothing but dry grass waiting to catch. Abigail knelt in the burning dark with a child in her arms, and understood that she had run into a trap, and the old voice came, the wagon flat voice, the voice that said, "You were always going to end like this. Too slow, too heavy. You should have taken the mule and run when he offered. You should have saved yourself, you stupid girl. Now you'll die in the fire and the boy with you, and it'll be your fault. Your fault, your— No, Abigail said out loud, fierce to the fire, to the voice, to all of it. No, not today. Because she had Silas Boone's wet blanket rolled behind the mule's saddle, and the mule, that fool brave animal, had not run it, stood there at the edge of the yard screaming and stamping. But it had not run, and on its back was a blanket. She'd soaked herself that morning, and water does not burn. She put Tommy down. "Stay," she told him, in the voice that left no room. The Della-killing voice, the voice the summer had built. "Stay right here one breath, and I will be back. I swear it on my life, I will be back." And she crawled to the screaming mule through the closing fire, and she dragged the wet blanket down, and she crawled back, and she had the boy again, and she wrapped them both in it, the wet wool steaming where the sparks hit it, and she gathered Tommy Hatch under her own body, so that if the fire took anything, it would take her back, and not his face. And she put her mouth against the wet wool by his ear. "Now we run," she said. "Through the gap into the field, and we don't stop, and the blanket keeps the fire off, and we run for the creek the long way round. Can you run, Tommy? Can you run for your mama?" "Yes," said the small voice. "Then run." And they ran. They came out of the gap into the burning field, wrapped in steaming wet wool, a thing the fire could not understand. Two small shapes running through the orange the wrong way, and the heat was a hand trying to crush them, and the smoke was a hand trying to stop their breath. And Abigail's hip was a white scream that she did not feel, would not feel, because a child was running beside her with his hand in hers. And there are things a body will do for a child's hand in the dark that it will never do for itself. They ran the long way round the field, along the very edge, where the fire hadn't reached yet, the wet blanket over both their heads, and the world was nothing but heat and roar, and the small hand in hers, and the next step, and the next step, and the next. And then the ground sloped down under her feet, and the air got cooler, just a degree, just enough, and she heard it. Singing. Mary Hatch's thin, cracked voice still singing down at the creek, singing her remaining children through the end of the world, and not knowing, not daring to hope, whether the woman who'd run into the fire was bringing back her sixth. "Mary!" Abigail screamed it with the last air in her body. "Mary, I've got him! I've got Tommy!" The singing stopped, and Abigail Turner came down the last of the slope and into the shallow water of Cooper's Creek, with a 4-year-old boy alive in her arms. And Mary Hatch came up out of the water screaming her son's name, and the fire roared over the top of the bank above them, and burned the whole world, black and down in the water, in the wet, in the dark. 8 people and a hard, brave woman lay in the creek with the wet blankets over them, and the fire passing over their heads like the wing of something enormous and terrible. And they lived. They lived. It passed in minutes that felt like the length of a life. The roar moved over them, and on up the valley, chasing the wind, and the orange light dimmed to red, and the red to a smoldering gray, and one by one they lifted their heads out of the water, and found the world still there, scorched and smoking and black, but there and themselves in it, alive everyone. Mary Hatch held her son and could not speak. She held him and rocked him and pressed her face to his sooty hair, and made a sound that wasn't crying and wasn't laughing, but was the sound a soul makes when it gets back the thing it had already given up for lost. And then she reached out one hand blind and caught Abigail's wrist and gripped it and looked at her over the top of her son's head. "You went in," she said. "The fire had the house, and you went in. For my Tommy, a woman I never met. He was scared," Abigail said simply. "And nobody should be left when they're scared, not ever, not by anybody." And Mary Hatch looked at this stranger, this hard, brave, plus-size woman, with her face black with soot, and her dress burned through at the shoulder, and her bad hip plainly paining her. Now that the running was done, and Mary Hatch said the thing that would travel down the valley, and into Hollow Pine, and through every homestead in the range in the weeks to come, the thing that began the turning of the whole story. "I don't know your name, but I will teach my children to say it in their prayers every night for the rest of their lives. Abigail," she said. "Abigail Turner." And then, because it was true, because she'd earned it, because the summer had made it so, But these days most folks just call me Boone's woman, and I'd be proud to be that to you too. It was only then, with the family safe and the fire past and the danger draining out of her all at once, that Abigail remembered. Silas. She came up out of the water so fast she near fell. Silas, where's Silas? He went to break the fire on the road. Where's the road? Which way? And Hatch the father, soot black and shaking, pointed up the valley, the way the fire had gone, and his face told her everything before his mouth did. The road's that way, ma'am. Up where the fire's heaviest now. If your man went to break the fire on the road... He couldn't finish it, but Abigail was already moving. She left the family in the creek safe, and she dragged herself up the scorched bank on her hands and knees, and she stood in the smoking black ruin of the world, and she screamed his name into it. Silas. Nothing. Smoke and the tick of cooling embers, and the wind dying down at last too late, and a world burned to charcoal as far as she could see. Silas Boone. And then far off up the ruined valley through the haze, a shape. A horse riderless walking back toward her out of the smoke, dragging its reins. His horse. Empty. Abigail Turner stood in the ashes with her hand pressed to her mouth, and her whole summer, her whole new life, her whole reborn heart hanging on the next thing she did or did not see. In the smoke, and the riderless horse came on toward her, and behind it the smoke hung thick as a curtain, and she could not see. She could not see whether anything followed. She could not see whether the man who'd carried her out of a creek and called her worth carrying was lying somewhere up that black valley, the way Ruth had lain under the snow. Too late, too late. The one thing in the world she could not bear to lose to the one thing she could not fight. She did not wait. She did not weep. She had learned this summer exactly one thing to do when the worst came, and she did it now. She walked into the smoke to find him. "I'm coming, Silas," she said to the horse, to the smoke, to the man she could not yet see. "You hear me? I always come back, and so do you. So you'd best be alive up there, Silas Boone, because I did not survive my whole family and a wagon train, and 3 days of sun, and a creek full of wolves, and a house full of fire to lose you now. Do you hear me? I'm coming. Hold on, I'm coming." And she went up the black valley into the smoke, limping, soot-streaked, half-burned, and entirely unstoppable, calling his name into the ruin, one foot in front of the other, toward whatever was waiting for her in the smoke. She found him a quarter-mile up the black valley, and for one heartbeat that took 10 years off her life, she thought he was dead. He was down. Half under a fallen smoking pine that had come across the trail, one leg pinned, his face gray and slack, soot caked in the lines of it, and Abigail's whole world stopped on the sight of him lying there. The way Ruth must have lain under the snow, the thing he'd dreaded above all other things, the helpless dying come round at last for him. "No," she said. "No, no, no. No, no." She went down on her knees beside him and put her hand to his throat, and under the soot and the grime there was a pulse, weak and slow, but there. "Silas." She patted his face hard. "Silas Boone, you open your eyes. You hear me. You don't get to do this. You don't get to be too late. Open your eyes." His eyelids fluttered. He coughed a deep, wet, tearing cough, and his eyes came open red and streaming and unfocused, and they found her face and held on it. "Abigail," he rasped. You're alive. The boy. Did you... He's alive. They're all alive. Every soul in that creek alive because of you. Now hush and let me get this tree off you." She was already crawling to the trunk, getting her shoulder under it, but it was a full-grown pine, and her one good hip and 2 arms weren't going to lift it, and she knew it the second she tried. "It won't move. Silas, it won't move. I can't." "Leg's not broke," he said through his teeth. "Pinned, not broke. I can feel my foot. Get a lever. There's deadfall. Everywhere now. Get a stout limb, wedge it, I'll push." She found a limb, a charred stout one, and she jammed it under the trunk and threw her whole weight on it, and Silas pushed with his free leg and roared with the pain of it, and the trunk lifted an inch too, and he dragged his pinned leg free and rolled clear and lay in the ash gasping, and the trunk dropped back with a thud that would have crushed him. For a moment neither of them could speak. They lay in the black ruin, breathing the bitter air alive, both of them against every odd. Then Silas started weakly to laugh. "What?" Abigail said. "What in God's name is funny?" "You," he wheezed. "You came up a burning valley on a bad hip to lever a tree off a fool with a charred stick. And I had it in my head all summer that I was the one doing the saving up here." He turned his head to look at her, and his red eyes were wet with more than smoke. "I had it backwards, didn't I? The whole time. I thought I pulled you out of that creek, but you're the one's been pulling me out of mine all along." She didn't have words for that, so she did the thing instead. She gathered his big soot-streaked head into her lap and held it there in the ashes of the world. And he let her, this man who'd held himself apart for 10 years. He let her hold him, and the two of them stayed like that a while in the smoking ruin, until he was strong enough to stand. And then she got her shoulder under his arm, and the two of them walked out of the Black Valley together, leaning on each other. Neither one carrying the other, both of them carrying both. The fire was the making of them in the end. It burned the range to charcoal, but it forged something in its heat that the company for all its money could never have reckoned on. Because the families of that valley, the Dunmores and the Aldous and old Pettigrew with his hogs and the Hatches with their 6 living children, they did not forget who came up the valley ahead of the fire. They did not forget the silent mountain man who broke the fire on the road so they'd have a way out, nor the hard, brave woman who held the creek and went into a burning house for a 4-year-old boy. Word of it went down to Hollow Pine before the embers were even cold, and by the time Silas and Abigail came down off the mountain a week later to buy what they needed to rebuild the town that had once whispered about the wild man, and would have whispered about his nameless woman, met them in the street instead and took off its hats. It was a different thing being looked at like that. Abigail felt it the moment they rode in. She'd spent her whole life being looked at and measured, and found too much or too little. And now, a whole town turned to watch her come down the street, and there was nothing in the looking but respect, and she did not know at first what to do with her face. "They're staring," she murmured to Silas. "They are. I don't know how to be stared at like this." "You'll learn," Silas said. "Same as you learned everything else. Hold your chin up. You earned every eye on you in this street." But the company had not given up. A company never does until it must. They were loading the wagon outside the mercantile when the thin man came out of the land office across the street, and Abigail knew him at once, the black coat, the flat hat Pruitt, and beside him a heavier man in a fine suit she'd not seen before, and her stomach tightened. Pruitt crossed the street toward them with his lawyer's smile back in place, the heavier man a step behind. "Mr. Boone," Pruitt said. "And the lady. I'm so very glad to find you both. Such a dreadful fire. The whole range. A tragedy." His eyes were cold above the smile. "It does rather change things, doesn't it? Burned out land, ruined homesteads, families with nothing left. The company is prepared to be generous, Mr. Boone, to all these poor folk and to you. A man would have to be a fool to hold a worthless burned mountain when he could sell it for." "That fire," said a voice from down the street, "started on company ground." The whole street went quiet. It was Jeb Dunmore who'd spoken, and he came forward out of the gathering crowd with his hat in his hands, but his eyes hard, and behind him came Hatch. And behind Hatch came old Pettigrew, and behind them more the whole valley. It seemed the people who'd ridden out ahead of the flames. "Say that again," Pruitt said softly. "I'll say it loud as you like." Dunmore turned to the crowd to the town. "My boy and me, we were the last out past the East Ridge, and we seen where it started. Seen it with our own eyes. Started in that dry gully on the company's east parcel, the one they cleared and left full of slash and brush all summer. A company man was up there that morning. We seen his horse. And not an hour later the gully's afire and the whole range with it." He turned back to Pruitt. "You burned us out. You burned us out a purpose to buy the land cheap, after same as you done up north, except this time the wind turned on you, and you near killed 40 souls and 6 children, and you don't even have the decency to look ashamed." The heavy man in the fine suit had gone pale. He put a hand on Pruitt's arm. "Pruitt, you said the fire was an accident, You told me—" "Shut up," Pruitt hissed. But it was too late, and everyone in the street had heard, and the heavy man who Abigail would learn was a real investor from back east, a man who'd put real money into the Hollow Pine Land and Cattle Company believing it to be an honest concern, took a full step back from the thin man as though he'd found him to be a snake. And then Mary Hatch walked out into the street with Tommy on her hip. She walked right up to Pruitt, and she stood in front of him, this small woman with her son on her hip, and the whole town watched. "You did this to my children," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "You set a fire that near burned my babies alive in their own yard. And do you know who saved them? Not you, not your company. Her." She pointed at Abigail. "That woman there, the one you'd run off this mountain so you could steal the water. She went into the fire for my Tommy when the rest of the world was running out of it. So you tell me, mister, you tell this whole town, which one of you is the trespasser up on that mountain? The honest folk who'd die for each other, or the company that had burned children for copper?" There was no sound in the street but Tommy Hatch, 4 years old, sucking his thumb against his mother's shoulder, looking at the thin man with the solemn, enormous eyes of a child who'd been to the edge of the world and back. Pruitt looked at the boy, and for 1 second something flickered across that smooth, cold face. Something almost human, and then it was gone, smoothed back over. Because a man like Pruitt has buried his own conscience too deep to dig up in a single street on a single afternoon. "This is slander," he said. "Slander and conjecture. You've no proof of any of it. A horse on a hill, a gully that caught in a drought. You'll not make any of it stick in a court of—" "In a court your company bought," said a new voice. And here came the twist that turned the whole thing over. The heavy man in the fine suit stepped forward. The Eastern investor. And he was holding a leather case, and his face was the face of a man who has just understood he's been made an accomplice to something he never agreed to. "My name is Edward Crane," he said to the town. "I am to my lasting shame the principal investor in the Hollow Pine Land and Cattle Company. I came west 3 weeks ago because the returns this company was sending back east were too good to be true, and I have learned in 3 weeks exactly how they were too good to be true. I have seen the books. I have seen the payments to the county judge. I have seen the insurance claims filed on land that burned in fires that started every one on company ground." He turned to Pruitt, and his voice shook with fury. "I trusted you. I put my family's money and my family's name behind you, and you've made me a party to arson and to the attempted murder of children. Well, no more." He opened the leather case. "These are the company's true books," he said, holding them up for the whole street to see. "Every bribe, every fire, every fraudulent claim. I am taking these to the federal marshal in Denver myself by my own hand, because I will not trust them to a county judge that's bought and paid for. And I will testify. Against my own company. Against this man." He looked at Pruitt with loathing. "Because I would rather lose every cent I've put into this poisoned ground than have it said that Edward Crane stood by while children burned for copper. It is a fearsome thing to watch a man's empire fall in a single afternoon in a single dusty street, and the town of Hollow Pine watched it fall on the thin man." Pruitt watched him understand all at once that his own investor had turned, that the books were out, that the families had seen his man on the hill, that there was no court left to buy, and no story left to tell, and Pruitt's smooth face came apart at last, and underneath it there was nothing, just a small, frightened man who'd done terrible things for money and was about to answer for them. The marshal in Denver came for him 3 weeks later. Edward Crane was as good as his word, and better, for he not only testified, he made restitution, paying out of his own ruined pocket to rebuild every homestead. The company's fires had destroyed the Dunmores and the Aldises and the Hatches, every one, and when the families tried to thank him, he would not let them, saying a man does not get thanked for cleaning up filth he helped to make. The copper stayed in the mountain. The water stayed in Cooper's Creek, free for every homestead in the valley, the way it had run since before any company ever dreamed of owning it. And the bought judge, when the federal men were done with him, was bought no more, nor a judge any longer. But that's a different story, and a colder one. But that was all still to come in the weeks ahead. On the day Pruitt's empire fell in the street, There was one more thing to fall, and it fell on Abigail, and it was the thing she'd been bracing for in the back of her heart all summer without ever quite letting herself name it. Because in the crowd that had gathered to watch the company's reckoning, there was a face she knew. A face she had last seen on a wagon seat, looking straight ahead, not turning, while she screamed his name into the dust. Her father. Josiah Turner stood at the edge of the crowd, gray and stooped, and older than the month should have made him, and he was staring at Abigail as though he'd seen a ghost, which she supposed in a way he had. The crowd noticed. The crowd always notices. A path opened between them, the daughter and the father. The whole town of Hollow Pine gone silent, sensing, without knowing, that here was another reckoning, a private one, come due in their public street. Josiah took off his hat. His hands were shaking. "Abigail," he said. "Abby. They said down in the territory the talk was they said a woman saved a whole valley from the fire. A woman left for dead off a wagon train, and I couldn't let myself." His voice broke. "It's you. You're alive. My girl. You're alive." Abigail looked at her father across the open space, and she waited for it to come, the old longing. The little girl part of her that had spent 3 years in Della's house, starving for one kind word from this man. The part that had cried for him on the flat, that had talked to him in the dark of that first terrible night, that had wanted more than water, more than rescue for her father to come back and say he was sorry. She waited for it. And it did not come. That was the thing that surprised her. Standing there in the street, she searched herself for the wound and found where the wound had been a scar. Healed over. Closed. The summer had done it. The fire had done it. Silas had done it. Tommy Hatch's small hand in the dark had done it. She had spent 24 years needing this man's love, and somewhere on this mountain she had stopped. And she hadn't even noticed the moment it happened, the way you don't notice the moment a fever breaks, only that you wake one day, and it's gone. "Where's Della?" Abigail said. Josiah flinched. "Abby. Where is she? And my stepbrothers? Where are they, Pa?" "Oregon," he said low. "They went on to Oregon. I turned back, Abby, after. I couldn't. The further west we went, the worse it sat on me, what was done. I turned the wagon back to look for you. Della wouldn't come. Said I was a fool, said you were long dead, said I'd die too, looking for a corpse in the rocks." His shoulders shook. "I looked for a month, up and down that flat. I gave you up for dead. And then I heard the talk of the fire and the woman and Abby, I came as fast as a horse could carry me. To see, to know." "You looked for a month," Abigail said. "I did, I swear it. After." Her voice was very quiet and very steady, and it carried to every soul in that silent street. "You looked for me after Pa. After you let her drive the wagon. After you sat in that seat with your hands in your lap and let your wife send your daughter up a trail to die. You looked for me after." She shook her head slowly. "I don't doubt you looked. I don't doubt you grieved. I expect you've grieved every day since, and I'm sorry for it. I am, because grief is a hard thing to carry. But you want to know the truth of it, Pa. The looking after doesn't undo the letting it happen. A man who lets a thing be done and then weeps over it has still let it be done. Abby, please. I was weak. I was a coward. I know it. I've known it every day. But I'm your father. You were my father." She said it gently, and that was the worst of it. The gentleness, because there was no rage left in her to make it cruel. Only the plain, flat truth that Silas had taught her how to speak. On the flat, when you let her turn that wagon, you stopped being it. Blood made you my father. But blood's just the start of a thing, Pa. It's not the whole of it. A father is a man who stands between his child and the dark. And when the dark came for me, you sat in the wagon seat, and you let it have me." She drew a breath. "I forgive you. You hear me say it so the whole town hears it too. I forgive you, Josiah Turner, because carrying hate is a weight, and I've carried enough heavy things this year. But forgiving you isn't the same as taking you back. I forgive you, and I let you go, and those are two different gifts, and you only get the one." Josiah Turner stood in the street with his hat in his shaking hands, and he wept openly, the way a man weeps when he understands at last the full size of a thing he can never undo. And the town watched, and not one soul moved to comfort him. Because they had all heard by now the story of the woman left on the flat, and there is a kind of cold a man earns for himself that no stranger has the right to warm. And then Silas Boone stepped forward. He'd stood back through all of it, letting it be hers, knowing it had to be hers. But now he came and stood beside her, and he looked at Josiah Turner. And when he spoke, it was without heat, which made it land all the heavier. "Mr. Turner, I'm the man that found your daughter dying in a creek with the wolves already come for her. I'm the man that's watched her all summer build a life back up out of nothing but her own two hands and her own hard will, after the people that owed her everything left her with less than nothing." He paused. "I won't tell you to leave. It's a free street and a free country, but I'll tell you this plain the way I tell everything. The woman standing next to me is worth more than your whole wagon train and everybody on it, and it took a stranger to see it because the people that should have seen it were too busy weighing her by what she cost them. You measured her by the trouble she was. I measured her by the woman she is, and I got the better end of that bargain by a country mile." He put his hat back on, settling it, a man done with a conversation. "Now if you've come to be forgiven, you've had it, and that's more than you'd any right to. But if you've come thinking there's a way back to her, there isn't. And the sooner you make your peace with that, the sooner you can start carrying it like a man, instead of standing here in the street making her carry it for you." And that was the whole of it. There was nothing left to say after that, and Josiah Turner knew it, and he put his hat on his gray head, and he turned, and he walked back down the street the way he'd come, an old man who'd thrown away the one thing that might have been the saving of his life. And he did not look back, and this time it was Abigail who watched a member of her family disappear into the distance, and felt where she'd expected grief, only the clean, cool piece of a wound finally fully closed. She watched until he was gone. Then she let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 24 years. "You all right?" Silas said low, just for her. "I am," she said, and was surprised to find it true. "I thought it'd break me seeing him. I thought I'd fall apart or run to him or scream at him something. And instead I just feel like I set down a thing I've been carrying so long I forgot it was heavy." She looked up at Silas. "Is that wrong? To feel near to peaceful watching my own father walk away?" "No," Silas said. "That's not wrong. That's healed. They're not the same as cold peace and healed, though they can look it from the outside. You didn't watch him go cold, Abigail. You watched him go free. There's a difference, and you'll feel it in the morning, and the morning after that, and every morning the rest of your life." They finished loading the wagon in a town that had in a single afternoon watched a company fall and a family reckoning come due, and a woman it had once called nameless become in the space of a season the most respected soul in the valley. And as they made to climb up onto the wagon seat to ride back up their mountain, Mary Hatch came one more time across the street, and this time she didn't have a speech. She just put Tommy down, and the boy ran the last few steps on his own, and threw his arms around Abigail's legs and held on. Abigail knelt down slow on her bad hip and gathered the child up, and Tommy Hatch put his small mouth against her ear and whispered the thing he'd been wanting to say since the creek. "You reached out in the dark," he whispered, "like you said. And I took your hand." And Abigail Turner, who had reached out in the dark her whole life, and so rarely found a hand to take, held the child who had taken hers, and looked over his head at the man who had reached down into a creek and lifted her out of the dark when she'd given up reaching. And she understood all at once, and completely, that the family she'd been born to had never been her family at all. Her family was here. It had found her on a mountain. It had a quiet man with scarred hands, and a small boy with solemn eyes, and a whole valley of folk who'd take off their hats when she rode in. And it was bound together not by blood, which is only where a thing starts, but by the harder, truer thing, the thing you choose and keep choosing, the standing between each other and the dark. She handed Tommy back to his mother. She climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Silas, and as he took up the reins to turn the team toward the mountain and home, she put her hand over his on the leather, and he stopped and looked at her. "Silas Boone," she said. When we get back up that mountain, there's a thing I want to talk to you about. A thing about the future, about what kind of life we're building up there, and whether we're building it as two people sharing a roof or as something more than that." She held his eyes. "I'm not asking now. I'm telling you it's coming, so you've got the ride up the mountain to get your answer ready. Because I've spent my whole life having other folks decide what I am to them. And I find I'd like just once to do the deciding myself, and to give a man the chance to decide back. Fair." And Silas Boone, who had not let himself want a future in 10 years, who had buried his hope under a slide on the north face, and lived alone with the cold of it, looked at this woman beside him on the wagon seat. This woman the world had thrown away, and he had found. And something came up in his weathered face that had no grief in it at all, none for the first time since Ruth, a thing that was all hope and no fear, and he turned his hand over under hers and laced his scarred fingers through her strong ones. "Fair," he said, and he turned the team toward the mountain, and the two of them rode up out of the town together into the long gold light of the late summer afternoon, toward home, toward the future, toward the talk that was coming and the life that was waiting. And Abigail Turner did not look back at the town or the road or the place where her father had stood, because everything she wanted was up the mountain ahead of her, and she had learned this long, hard summer, the one thing that mattered most of all. The road that matters is the one in front of you. And she meant to ride every mile of it with her chin up and her hand in his all the way home. The talk came that night on the mountain by the fire, the way all their truest talks had come. The cabin had survived. The fire had run up the valley and spent itself on the rocks below their bald knob and left the homestead untouched, a small green island in a black sea. And that the whole valley agreed in the weeks after was the nearest thing to a sign from God anybody had seen in a long while, that the one home left standing should be the home of the two who'd ridden out to save everyone else. But Abigail wasn't thinking of signs that night. She was thinking of the thing she'd told Silas was coming, and now that they were home, now that the supper was eaten and the fire was banked low and the long day was behind them, she found her courage had gone soft on her, and she stood at the window with her back to him, working herself up to it. "You've been at that window an hour," Silas said from his chair. "The mountain'll keep till morning. Whatever it is you're winding yourself up to say, you'd best say it before you wear a hole in my floor." She turned around. "All right," she said. "I'll say it plain the way you taught me. Silas Boone, I want to know if you'll marry me." She'd meant to lead up to it. She'd had a whole speech. It all fell out of her head, and what came out instead was the bare bone of the thing, and now it hung in the air of the small warm room, and she watched it land on him, and her heart hammered so hard she thought he must hear it across the cabin. Silas Boone went very still. "You're asking me," he said. "I am. And before you say a word, I want you to know why I'm the one doing the asking, because it matters." She came across the room and stood in front of his chair, looking down at him. "My whole life somebody else decided what I was. My father decided I was a burden. Della decided I was a thing too heavy to be worth feeding. The world decided I was a body to be measured and found too much. Even you, Silas, that first night, you decided I was worth carrying out of that creek, and thank God you did. But every single time, somebody else did the deciding. And I swore to myself somewhere along this summer that there was one decision in my life that was going to be mine, the biggest one, who I'd spend my life beside. I wasn't going to wait to be chosen ever again. I was going to do the choosing." Her voice didn't shake. "So I'm choosing. I choose this life, and I choose you. And now it's your turn, Silas Boone. Now you get to decide back." For a long moment, Silas didn't say anything at all, and Abigail's courage near deserted her entirely in that silence, and she'd just opened her mouth to take it all back, to say, never mind to bolt for the door of the thing, the way she'd learned to bolt from anything that might hurt her. Too bad when Silas Boone stood up out of his chair. He stood up, and he took her face in both his scarred hands, gentle as a man handling something he's afraid to break, and he looked at her with 10 years of buried grief and one whole summer of resurrection in his eyes. "Abigail Turner," he said, and his rough voice cracked clean down the middle. I've spent 10 years up on this mountain telling myself I'd used up my whole life's share of loving somebody, that I'd had my one, and lost her, and that was the end of it. That a man only gets to love once, and I'd had mine. And then you hung your wash on my line." He shook his head slowly, a man marveling at his own foolishness. "I thought I was saving a half-drowned stranger that night. I didn't know I was hauling my own life back up out of that creek along with you. I didn't know the cabin had been a grave for 10 years until you came and made it a home and showed me the difference. So you ask me, will I marry you?" His thumbs brushed the tears off her cheeks. "Woman, you could have asked me anything in this world, and the answer would have been yes. Because somewhere this summer you became the world to me, and a man doesn't say no to the world. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. I'd be honored past speaking to marry you. And I'll spend whatever years I've got left making sure that not one day goes by you don't know down to your bones that you were never too heavy, and never too slow, and never too much. You were always, every day of your life, exactly enough. More than enough. You were the whole of it." And Abigail Turner, who had been left to die under the summer sun by the people who shared her blood, who had crawled to a creek to die alone, who had survived snake and wolf and fire and a whole bought county, who had reached out in the dark her entire life, and so rarely found a hand to take, put her arms around the neck of the man who had chosen her back, and held on, and was held, and the two of them stood in the firelight of the home they'd built, and wept and laughed at the same time, the way people do when joy comes so late and so hard won that the body doesn't quite know which way to let it out. They were married in Hollow Pine 3 weeks later on a Sunday, and the whole valley came. It was the largest gathering the town had seen in years. The Dunmores came, and the Aldous family, and old Pettigrew in a collar so stiff it like to choked him. And the Hatches, all 8 of them, with Tommy scrubbed pink and wearing shoes he kept trying to take off. And Edward Crane came too, all the way back from Denver, where he'd seen Pruitt put in irons, and the bought judge thrown off his bench. Crane, who'd ruined himself to do right, and found in the doing of it a kind of peace his money had never bought him. He stood at the back of the church and wept like a child. And when Abigail asked him after why a man should weep at a wedding of 2 people he'd known only a season, he said, "Because, ma'am, I came west believing the worst about people and aiming to profit off it. And instead, I found the best of them up on a burning mountain, and a man my age doesn't often get his whole picture of the world turned right side up. I'm not weeping for you. I'm weeping for the relief of being wrong. There was one empty place at the wedding, and everyone felt it and no one spoke of it, and that was the place where a father should have stood." Josiah Turner had not gone back to Oregon. Abigail learned that much through the talk that moved up and down the valley. He'd taken work at a livery in a town 2 days' ride south, an old man mucking stalls living small and quiet, and he had not come to the wedding because he had not been asked, and he had not asked to be asked because whatever else Josiah Turner had failed at in his life, he had finally learned the one lesson Silas had laid out for him in the street, that a man carries his own weight and doesn't make his wronged daughter carry it for him. But the morning of the wedding, a package came to the church. No note that needed signing, just a small wrapped bundle, handed off through 3 sets of hands. And inside it was a thing Abigail hadn't seen since she was a girl. A thing she'd thought lost forever in the move west, or sold off in one of Della's purges. A small carved wooden bird no bigger than her palm, worn smooth with handling. Her mother's. Her father had carved it for her mother during their own courting a lifetime ago, and her mother had given it to Abigail on her deathbed. And Della had made it disappear the way Della made anything disappear that connected Abigail to the mother who'd come before. Josiah had kept it, all these years. He'd taken it back from Della somehow, or hidden it, or stolen it back, and he'd carried it through everything. Through the abandonment, and the month of searching, and the long ride, and the ruin of his own life. And now he'd sent it to his daughter on her wedding day. The one true thing he had left to give, with no note and no plea and no asking for anything in return. Abigail held the little bird in her wedding dress, and she understood the message in it as clear as if he'd written 10 pages. I was wrong. I have no right to you. But I kept this all these years because I never stopped being your father, even when I stopped deserving to be called it. Be happy. I won't trouble you again." She closed her hand around the bird, and she did not cry, because it wasn't a crying kind of feeling. It was a quieter thing than that, the feeling of a very old wound being touched one last time, and finding to her surprise that it didn't hurt anymore, that it had become just a part of her, the way an old scar becomes just a part of the skin. "You want him here," Silas said quietly, watching her face. It wasn't quite a question. "I'll send a rider. 2 days down, 2 back. We can wait." "No," Abigail said, and then slowly turning the little bird over in her fingers. "But write him. After. Tell him there's a place at our table any Sunday he wants to ride up and take it, not as my father. That door's closed and we both know it. But as a man who did one wrong thing so big it swallowed all the right things he ever did, and who's spent every day since trying to be worth the bird he carved." She slipped the carving into the pocket of her dress over her heart. "Everybody ought to have somewhere to ride to on a Sunday, Silas. Even him. Especially him. I won't give him back what he threw away, but I won't leave him with nothing either, because I know what nothing feels like, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, let alone a foolish old man who finally learned to love me about 20 years too late." And so they were married, and they rode back up the mountain, man and wife, and the wooden bird sat on the mantel of the cabin. From that day forward, and some Sundays. As the years went on, a gray old man did ride up the mountain and take a place at the far end of the table, quiet and grateful, and was given supper and given peace, and given never the thing he'd forfeited on the flat. And he never once asked for it. And that was how Abigail knew he'd truly changed. The years were good to them, in the way that hard-won things are good. The first summer of their marriage, Silas built onto the cabin a whole new wing of it, room by room, and Abigail worked beside him, every board of the way, the two of them raising walls together, the way they did everything together. And when folks down in Hollow Pine asked Silas why a man would build so big a house for just 2 people, Silas would get a look on his face and say only, "We'll grow into it." And they did. The first child came the second spring. A girl and Abigail held her newborn daughter in the same cabin, where she'd once lain half dead in a stranger's bed, and she looked down at this tiny perfect thing in her arms, and she made her a promise. The same promise she'd made on the flat to a daughter who hadn't existed yet. Only now the daughter was real and warm and breathing against her chest. "I will never leave you anywhere," she whispered to the baby. "Not for slow, not for heavy, not for any reason in this world. You hear me? Not ever. Wherever you go, I go. Whatever it costs. You are not a burden, and you are not an inconvenience, and you will never not for one single day of your life have to wonder whether you're worth keeping. Because you are. You were worth keeping from the very first breath you took, and I will spend my whole life making sure you never doubt it for a second." They named her Ruth. It was Abigail who chose it, and when she told Silas the big man had to leave the cabin and walk out into the dark for a while, and when he came back, his eyes were red, and he took the baby from Abigail's arms and held her against his chest and said in a voice gone all to pieces, "You'd name our daughter after her, after the woman who taught you how to love," Abigail said. "After the woman whose loss sent you up this mountain so you'd be here alone on the night I needed somebody to come down to that creek. I owe Ruth my life, Silas. If you'd married some other woman and moved to town and been happy, there'd have been no lonely mountain man to hear the wolves that night. Ruth's grief made you the man who saved me. So yes, I'd name our daughter after her. There's room in this family for both the love you lost and the love you found. There always was. That's the thing my own family never understood, that a heart's not a wagon with only so much room that you don't have to leave one thing behind to make space for another. Love just makes more room. It's the one thing that does." And Silas Boone held his daughter Ruth and looked at his wife Abigail across the cabin. And he understood that he had married a woman wiser than any preacher, a woman the world had thrown away as worthless, who turned out to carry more wisdom in her than a whole town of folk who'd never been tested. And he thanked God silently, the way he thanked God for most things that he'd been the fool, lucky enough to find her in a creek. More children came after Ruth, 2 boys and another girl, and the cabin grew to hold them all, and the homestead grew with them. But it was the garden that made the Boone place famous up and down the range. Abigail's garden, the one she'd started that first summer by the creek clearing brush off the rocky ground with a borrowed hoe, grew year by year into something the whole valley came to depend on. She had a gift for it, a gift she'd never known she had, because no one had ever let her find out. And under her hands, the Rocky Mountain soil gave up vegetables in abundance more than any one family could eat. And Abigail never let a surplus go to waste, and never let a hungry soul go empty. And that was the heart of the thing. That was what made the Boone homestead what it became. Because Abigail Turner Boone remembered hunger. She remembered the heel of cornbread on the flat. She remembered squirreling food away in Della's house so she wouldn't go to bed empty. She remembered exactly what it felt like to be the one nobody saved a plate for, and she had sworn somewhere deep down that no one who came to her door would ever feel that not while she had 2 hands to put food in theirs. So the travelers came and were fed. The widows came, the ones the hard country made fast and made often, and went home with their wagons loaded. The struggling families came in the lean seasons, the ones with too many mouths and too little land. And Abigail fed them and never once let them feel small for it, because she knew none better the difference between charity that lifts a body up and charity that grinds a body down, and she gave only the kind that lifted. "You give too much away," Silas told her once, watching her load a widow's wagon with enough to see a family through a hard month. He didn't say it as a complaint. He said it as a wonder. "I give exactly enough," Abigail said, settling the last sack. "I was a hungry woman once that nobody fed. Now I'm a woman with a full root cellar and 2 good hands. The math on that is simple, Silas. You feed the hungry when you've been hungry. Otherwise, what was the point of ever being full?" And it was the young women who marked her most in the end. The ones traveling west, the ones on the wagon trains, the ones who'd been told their whole lives, the way Abigail had been told, that they were too much or too little, too heavy or too plain or too slow or too poor, the ones who'd learned to make themselves small so as not to be a burden. Word had spread the way word does of the woman up on the mountain who'd been left for dead by her own blood, and had built a kingdom out of the leaving, and the young women began to stop at the Boone homestead just to see her, just to sit at her table, just to ask her how a body does it, how a body survives being thrown away and comes out the far side, not just alive, but whole. And Abigail would sit them down at her long table, the table with the empty place at the end, that an old man sometimes filled on Sundays, and she would tell them the truth, which was the only thing she ever told anybody. "They left me to die," she'd say, "because they'd decided what I was worth, and they'd decided it was nothing. And for a long time lying out on that flat, I believed them." That's the worst of it, you see. It's not the leaving. It's that they teach you to leave yourself. They get inside your head, and they leave you there, over and over, long after the wagon's gone. She'd let that sit. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you the thing I had to learn alone in the rocks with the wolves coming. The people who decide you're worthless, they're not the judge. They never were. They just talked the loudest and got there first. Your worth was never theirs to measure. It was never up for a vote. You came into this world worth keeping, and no father and no stepmother and no whole town that turns its back can vote that away, no matter how sure they sound. They can leave you, but they cannot make you worthless, because they were never the ones who decided it in the first place. And she'd reach out and take the young woman's hand across the table, the way no one had reached for hers for so long. "Don't you let the people who left you do your measuring. You hear me? You do your own. You always did your own. You just forgot you were allowed." And the young women would go on west to their own hard lives and their own hard country, carrying that with them, and some of them years later would tell it to their own daughters. And so the thing that Abigail Turner learned alone and dying on a flat in the Rocky Mountains traveled out across a whole frontier, hand to hand, table to table, a quiet army of women who'd been told they were too much and had decided, because a plus-size woman on a mountain told them they could, to believe themselves instead. That was her real harvest, bigger than any garden, the young women who rode away believing they were worth keeping. The years turned as years do, and one evening late in a good long summer, Abigail and Silas Boone walked out together to the edge of their homestead where the land fell away toward the valley they'd once saved from the fire. The valley green again, now scarred, but healed the way they both were. The way everything worth anything is. They were not young anymore. Silas walked with a stick. Now his bad leg never quite right since the fire, and Abigail's hip had not improved with the years, and they leaned on each other the way they had that first day, walking out of the Black Valley. Neither one carrying the other, both of them carrying both. Their children were grown, and some had homes of their own down the range, and Ruth, their first, had married a good man, and lived just over the next ridge, with children of her own grandchildren, who ran up the mountain on Sundays, to a grandmother who fed them till they couldn't move, and a grandfather who carved them little wooden birds. They stood together looking out over the valley in the long gold light. The way they had stood 10,000 evenings, and Abigail thought as she sometimes did about the flat and the wagon and the dust and the girl she'd been, who'd screamed her father's name into the empty mountains and gotten back only silence. "You're thinking about them," Silas said. He always knew. "I am," she said. "Not the way I used to. The hurt's long gone. I'm just thinking how strange it is that they meant to end me. Della especially. She handed me that firewood and pointed me up the trail, and she meant that to be the last anybody ever saw of Abigail Turner. She thought she was closing the book on me." Abigail shook her head slowly, looking out over the valley, over the garden, over the children's voices coming up from the house, over the whole improbable life that had grown up out of the worst day of her existence. "And all she did was close one chapter. That's all. She thought she was the end of my story, and she was only the end of a page. She turned the page for me, and I wrote everything that came after every word of it, and not one word was hers." "You ever wonder what became of her?" Silas said. "Della, Oregon." "No," Abigail said, and it was the plain truth. "And that's how I know I'm free of her. Not that I forgive her, because I don't. Some things don't get forgiven, and that's all right too. But that I don't wonder. I don't lie awake. I don't measure my life against hers, or hope she heard how I turned out, or wish she could see all this and choke on it. I just don't think of her at all most days, and when I do, like now, it's the way you think of weather from 20 years back. It happened. It's done. It can't reach me." She turned to look at her husband, her family, her chosen life. She believed my injured leg and my heavy body made me too slow and too costly and too burdensome to keep alive. That's what she decided I was. And I have spent the years since being slow and heavy and costly and burdensome right up this mountain into the best life a woman could ask for. Fed half a valley raised, 4 children buried nothing. I couldn't bear to bury and loved a good man every single day. So I reckon she was wrong about the math, Silas. I reckon I was worth keeping after all. Silas Boone put his arm around his wife in the long gold light. "I reckon you were the only thing on that whole wagon train worth keeping," he said. "And they were too blind and too small and too scared of your stepmother to know it. Their loss, my whole life." And Abigail Turner Boone, who had been left to die under the summer sun by the people who shared her blood, who had crawled to a creek with the wolves coming and refused to die quiet, who had been carried up a mountain by a stranger who became the love of her life, who had walked into a burning house for a child who wasn't hers, and into a hard town for a justice that was, who had looked her own father in the eye and forgiven him and let him go, who had fed the hungry and lifted the small, and sent a whole frontier's worth of thrown-away young women off to believe in themselves, who had taken a life meant to end in the dust and built it into a thing that travelers would speak of for 50 years, leaned her head against the shoulder of the man who had chosen her, and watched the sun go down over the valley she'd helped to save. The greatest thing her family ever did for her was leave her behind. They did not know they were doing it. They meant only cruelty. But in leaving her, they took away the one thing that had been holding her down her whole life, the need for the approval of people who would never give it. And once that weight was off her, she discovered she could carry anything at all, and she had, and she would for all the years still left to her. She had not been rescued. That was the thing she made sure every young woman who sat at her table understood. A man had come down to a creek and pulled her out of the water. Yes, but that was not the rescue, that was only the chance. The rescue she had done herself day by day, choice by choice, snake by snake, and fire by fire, and forgiveness by forgiveness, until the broken girl who'd been left on the flat was gone for good, and the whole woman who'd taken her place stood on a mountain she'd helped to save. Beside a family she'd chosen free of every chain, the people who left her had tried to bury her in. They had left her to die. She had decided instead to live. And in living, she had become so much more than the people who abandoned her could ever have imagined. That if Della Turner had ridden up that mountain on any Sunday of any of those long good years, she would not have recognized the woman she'd left in the dust for. There was nothing left of the girl who'd needed her. Nothing at all. Only a woman who had measured her own worth, found it past all counting, and never once let anybody take the measuring from her again. The sun went down gold over the mountain, and Abigail Turner Boone stood in the light of the life she had built out of the ashes of the life they took from her. And she was not slow, and she was not heavy, and she was not too much, and she was not a burden, and she was not abandoned, and she was not afraid, and she was at long and hard won. Last exactly and entirely and unshakably enough. She always had been. It just took being left under the summer sun to find it out.